The next talk is titled Puzzling Through Demand for Mail Voting in the 2020 Election. Our speaker is Charles Stewart. He is the Kenan Sahin Distinguished Professor of Political Science at MIT, where he has taught since 1985 and a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. His research and teaching areas include congressional politics, elections, and American political development. His current research about Congress touches on the historical development committees, origins of partisan polarization, and Senate elections. Since 2001, Professor Stewart has been a member of the Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project, a leading research effort that applies scientific analysis to questions about election technology, election administration, and election reform. The support of William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, Democracy Fund, and the Joyce Foundation, in 2017, Professor Stewart established the MIT Election Data and Science Lab, which applies scientific principles to how elections are studied and administered. In 2020, he partnered with Professor Nate Persily of the Stanford Law School to establish the Stanford-MIT Healthy Elections Project. And today, he's going to talk to us a little bit about that. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks again, Raphael, and thanks for y'all being willing to flex on the schedule today. I'm going to, let's see if we can get all this shared up and make sure I can see my slides. Thanks for that. Thanks for that nice introduction, and thanks to everybody for hopping on this virtual symposium. So I don't have very long to talk, and actually I'm talking about something that's reminds me of the old Gary Larson cartoon of the title of it was caption of it was In God's Kitchen, and there's the old God taking a pan out of the oven, which is obviously the earth, and he's thinking, gee, this thing looks half-baked. And so part of this analysis is half-baked in the sense that it's analysis happening in real time, but I thought that folks might be interested in the substance of it and to see kind of what's going on right now in trying sort of an academic project to try to help election officials and also reporters, the press, et cetera, get a sense about what's going to be happening in a couple of months. And so as the title suggests, puzzling over mail balloting in 2020, the idea is here, we are working, by we, I mean my team of graduate students, some postdocs, some employees that I have, mostly at MIT, some at Stanford, to try to wrangle as much data as we can to help, one, election officials plan for the amount of mail balloting they're likely to experience right now, so that the residual, which is in-person voting, can be well planned for in such a way that there aren't long lines, there's safe polling places, those sorts of things. So the capacity planning in this election is really monumental and unprecedented, with really no comparisons to the past for planning. And so we at MIT are attempting to get numbers out there for election officials to use so that they can make sense about what they're seeing or what to anticipate. And we're also trying to produce some estimates for people to understand what to make of the mail ballots when they come back. And so let me just kind of walk you through the work that my team is doing even as we speak. And it's half-baked in the sense that some of these estimates are still being done. There's still some estimations still to be done. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be pumping out a lot of stuff. And so the problem, as I was just suggesting, is to understand better demand for mail balloting. It's critical for two reasons. First of all, election officials need to understand if they have the right number of polling places, the right number of poll workers, if they have the right number of ballots ordered. That's one thing. The other thing is to anticipate election results as they come in. I think everybody in this call has been reading about the speculation about what's going to happen if all the Democrats vote in person on election day and all the Republicans vote in person on election day. all the Democrats vote by mail, and if those ballots get counted at different times, which by the way they don't, but if they do, what might the time trend of election returns look like on election night and in the following week? We've seen this major shift in mail voting since the onset of COVID-19, and as I was mentioning in the introduction, this shift was due to emergencies that we all understand. We all lived through that emergencies. The important thing to understand with respect to election administration is that, with the exception of probably 3 states in the United States, just the amount of mail voting that was engaged in around the country was at least an order of magnitude greater than they've ever done before. And it will be even greater in November than it was in the primaries. And so, as I said previously, it's not like really anybody can kind of look to anybody else to their left and the right to ask, well, how to anticipate what's going to happen in November. So we have to do some, we have to have some set of techniques to gather information from the public and from administrative records to give election officials some guidance about what they're likely to see. So the questions here that we're trying to answer is how many voters will cast votes by mail in 2020, and what will the partisan distribution be like? And the strategy that we're pursuing in some ways is pretty straightforward and simple in terms of the data that are available. It's just that this is not done very often. First of all, we're surveying likely voters in battleground states to ask them about their intentions. And I'll show you what that looks like and reasons why we want to be skeptical about the answers that they give us. And then for overall demand, that is how many people are going to be voting by mail. The strategy is pretty simple. It's to, first of all, set naive expectations, given what the surveys tell us, and then correct those expectations over time according to what we observe the requests to be for mail ballots. That's kind of at a macro level. There's another thing that, alas, I can't show you all the results for because they're not done, but to use multi-level regression and post-stratification, MRP or Mr. P technique, to try to propagate these estimates down to the county level, which is important because it's actually the counties that run elections, not the states. And then finally, to figure out within the overall demand how things are going to switch between Democrats and Republicans. And so let me tell you what the data that are available to do something like this. We're working right now on models for North Carolina, Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Texas. In part because they're battleground states or near battleground states, people are interested in them, and they have administrative data readily available to be worked on. We also have a voter intention survey in which we are asking 500 registered voters every 2 weeks in 7 battleground states what their intentions are. Do they intend to vote by mail, in person on election day, or early? We're going to do it in 3 waves, and we're probably going to actually add a 4th. We have a likely voter screen, and then we ask them, if you're going to vote in the general election, how are you most likely to vote? What mode? Okay. I'm going to show you North Carolina. North Carolina is an example where we add to what North Carolinians in the survey tell us, really great administrative data. And if you're so inclined, go to the FTP site of the North Carolina Board of Elections, and you will see all sorts of reports, including individual level reports of everybody who has returned an absentee ballot already, and information about them, their party, their sex, their age, those sorts of things, when they requested the ballot, when they got returned, and the like. You cannot get information about who has requested a ballot. You can only get right now, you're going to get information about who has returned the ballots, but you can get very detailed reports that have very kind of fine-grained cells that describe on a county by party, by race, by ethnicity, by sex, by age, by week of request, who's requested ballots. So we know a lot about the requests and about the returns, and we're trying to model them, okay? So this is what the voter intention survey looks like for 2016 for these states. I will point out that 26% of North Carolinians say that they intend to vote by mail in this election. It was 4% in the 2016 election. Similar stories across the different states, except to say that North Carolina is likely to have, historically has had less mail voting than other battleground states. And if you believe these results, are likely to have less mail voting. Nonetheless, it may have an increase in mail balloting by a factor of 5 in this election. The general idea is to come up with estimates of these various quantities to come up with an estimation of requests. And in order to do that, we have to first of all have an estimation of turnout, an estimation of the fraction who will be voting by mail, and an estimation of the turn rate. We begin to estimate the fraction of voting by mail from the surveys. Again, that's the naive model. We have one wave. I've just 5 minutes ago gotten the second wave into my inbox. I haven't even looked at the data. We have to estimate turnout. We don't know what turnout is going to be. We know it's likely to be high, but is it going to be 5 million? Is it going to be 4.8 million? Is it going to be 5.3 million? That's going to affect planning. And then finally, the return rate. Historically, 80% of requests get returned for counting. But we also think that voters this time are requesting absentee ballots as an insurance policy. And so the return rate might be going down. And over time, we haven't done this yet. Right now, we have naive models, but we're assuming kind of standard historical return rates until we get better information. And so this is what we're seeing right now. This is North Carolina so far. The red dotted line is the cumulative number of requests for absentee ballots in North Carolina. It's just passed recently last week 1 million. I'll show you 2016 in just a second. The blue line is the weekly requests. Probably the line that you want to look at is kind of the green area up above, which is kind of where the estimates for the number of requests exist within a band of 1.6 million to 1.9 million. Right now, that's a series of point estimates. We want to actually do some Monte Carlo simulation to kind of get a better, more rigorous band in there. But right now, I would say a point estimate is 1.6 million from all those calculations that we saw before. This shows the trajectory. This graph shows that if we get 100,000 more ballots requested every week between now and the election, we'll hit what the surveys are telling us, the naive model. So this is actually one that may very well be one of those cases where a naive model is going to be helpful. I see that I'm about running out of time, so let me just show you a few more things. First of all, just to kind of, I should have probably shown you this at the beginning, but this is a graph that kind of shows you, again, underscores the situation that election officials are in right now and making sense of the data. The dotted lines show, and for 2016, the lower, an order of magnitude less in 2016, the time trend of accumulated requests and week by week requests. And you see, first of all, it's one order of magnitude lower. Secondly, requests rise over time coming into the election as interest builds. In 2020, we see a front loading of requests and a decline over time. And so this is one of those cases where we can't learn from the past, and we have to be learning from what we are observing in real time. So we're halfway into this voting system. What this group knows about statistics is that it's going to be really hard to move off of where the accumulated numbers have come before. But nonetheless, there's still a month left, and things could change, and so we're watching it. Let me tell you about partisan intentions, and this is where things may not be so good in taking the naive model. So same survey, we break it down by Democrats and Republicans. Right now, in the first wave of the survey in North Carolina, for instance, 39% of Democrats said they're going to vote by mail. Only 8% of Republicans said they're going to vote by mail. In 2016, there was 6%, 6%. If you look at across this entire table, you will see there was no partisan difference in 2016 in these 7 states. But in the survey that we're doing, we see huge differences. Okay, so this is what the survey is saying. This is what the administrative record says in North Carolina. If we look at the distribution, cumulative distribution of people asking for mail ballots in North Carolina, we see that roughly half of them have been registered Democrats, about 20% have been registered Republicans, and about 33% have been unaffiliated with either party. Now, this is interesting from an administrative side, but it doesn't necessarily help us if we want to estimate what the vote shares are going to be, because we only have two parties and we don't have a third party or an unaffiliated party getting votes. And so we have to figure out how to allocate votes among the unaffiliated voters into the Democratic side and the Republican side. I will just kind of wave my arms here and say the choice made at the moment based on some auxiliary naive regressions have convinced us that actually we can just take for now, again, the naive model, the fraction the Democrats, fraction of Republicans, and take the two-party estimate and use that as an estimate about what the vote share of the mail ballots in North Carolina are about to be. Okay, so if we do that, we see that over the last 6 weeks or so, about 72% of the vote, if you will, of the mail ballots in North Carolina have been Democratic. If we just look at the Democrats and the Republicans, okay, two-party vote share. The problem is that if we look at the survey results, 85% of if you take the survey results, we should be seeing 85% of the mail ballots being cast by Democrats with pretty large error bounds around, but nonetheless, those error bounds never comport with what we're actually seeing administratively. So it could very well be, in fact, my betting right now is that we need to figure out ways of downweighting Democrats who are saying that they're going to be voting by mail and Republicans who are saying that they're going to be voting in person. And so I'll just conclude here by noting that, forecasting demand for mail balloting, both the overall level and the partisan split, is complicated by the unprecedented level of demand, the non-comparable data between the survey and the administrative data, and the partisan expressiveness in the survey, where it's clear that Democrats and Republicans are misreporting what they're likely to be doing. And that's why we need to build a predictive model that combines what we're observing with what survey people are saying in the survey. Overall demand for mail ballots seems to be slightly over-predicted by the survey, but the partisan demand appears to be poorly predicted by the survey. And so we need to be more dynamic on that side. So that's what we're doing over at the lab to try to protect democracy. I'd be happy to take any questions now or questions later. And apologize for going over.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes for questions, so I'll let people write in if they have one. In the meantime, I'll ask you a couple. So I don't think you got to the part, or if you did, I missed it, where you explained what's the lag between counting mail votes and the in-person ones? Is there a lag, and if there is, what is it?
It turns out it varies by state, and it depends on the legal procedures that the states have. In a state like North Carolina, where they can actually prepare. So I should step back and just for education for the group, because this is being talked about a lot. Probably 3/4, if not more, of the time that's spent in counting a mail ballot is in the so-called preparation of the ballot for counting. That's looking at this, taking it out of the envelope, looking at the signature, and doing those sorts of things. If you can do that before Election Day, then the scanning is pretty fast. And then there depends on whether you do it centrally or whether you do it in person. A state like North Carolina, given their procedures, is likely to be able to actually report their mail ballots and their in-person votes simultaneously. So in a sense, getting this partisan division right is less important in North Carolina for us than it will be in a state like Michigan, where because their procedures will mean that they won't be able really to do serious counting until the polls close. It can be several days with Michigan. So I would say Michigan, Pennsylvania are two states where it could take a week to finally get all of the ballots counted. A state like Florida, a state like North Carolina, a state like Wisconsin, because of their laws and practices, actually that can probably do it simultaneously. And that's what led to my kind of sideways quip in which I said, there may not be as great a division in kind of the vote counting as a lot of people are being led to believe in the press right now.
Cool. All right. Well, we are out of time now, but I will say one more thing. So one of our speakers, Amanda Cox, she does database for the New York Times. She was not able to come, and the reason is because she's working on the needle, I think, or something like the needle.
Yep.
And I just want to, not much a question, but just letting you know that I'm hoping that your research gets to them so that they can incorporate that into the needle and keep everybody from freaking out too much.
Well, I would just report that from what I can tell, actually the Times and the network decision desks are well aware of these things and they're working on it. Okay, unfortunately, great. The Associated Press is not. And so,
okay.
There you go.
All right. Well, thanks again.